Welcome, teacher candidates for Point Loma Nazarene University. My name is Lori Call. I'm a professor here in the Bakersfield Extension Program. I support students in educational leadership, but also in clinical practice, going through the process of doing the fun student teaching and preparing for the TPA. Now, as you know, because you've already done cycle 1, the TPA is extremely important. This is how you get your credential. Without passing scores in cycle 1 and cycle 2, you cannot get your credential. So this is the big test, the big one, just like in law school, taking the bar exam. Okay, so you've got to take this very seriously, as you understand that you had to in cycle 1. So 2 things you need to be doing. You need to have this compass map in front of you that I have up on the screen, and you need to also download the assessment guide. Those 2 items need to be critical right now in you knowing backwards and forwards. I'd be happy to print one for you, leave it on my porch if we're still dealing with COVID-19, or you can print it yourself, ask someone else to print it. We will figure out a way, but you want to be able to write on it, highlight it, do whatever you need to do to be able to remember the content and the information. You need to know it forwards and backwards, okay? First thing I should say and do. Second thing, do not delay. Don't delay and wait to start the process. Start exactly now and go through the process as I say, or whoever's teaching this course tells you to. Don't get behind, okay? You know how that feels when you get behind and you're dealing with all kinds of things all at one time. So stay up and accurate on the times as much as you can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over cycle 2. A big picture of cycle 2 is that the focus is on assessment. The CTC is looking for you to show them that you can teach a unit of 3 to 5 lessons and then assess during the process with an informal assessment, a student self-assessment, and finishing up with a formal assessment. And you can look at that data and then let it drive your instruction as to what you're going to do next, whether you're going to reteach or you're going to do an extension lesson that would enhance and higher the rigor of the content. So with that in mind, we still have the same steps as in cycle 1. So if you take a look here, it's plan, step 1, teach and assess is step 2, reflect is step 3, and step 4 is apply, which are the same as they were previously, okay? However, they're a little different in each. Step 1 plan for cycle 2, you are focusing in on the contextual information of the whole class. You are no longer focused on 3 focused students like you were in cycle 1. You're thinking of the whole class, and within that whole class, who makes up the class? There's going to be general ed students, there's going to be IEP students, there's going to be students with 504s, ELs, and any other social emotional behavior issues that may be going on in the class. That's the whole picture of the class that you're looking at, and that's the contextual information they want here in part A. Okay, so that's what you need to be thinking of. So it's the contextual information of the whole class, and how are you going to make a lesson, build a lesson prepared for them. The assets, the word assets is critical. So if we're thinking about the words that you're looking at, the vocabulary, you need to use them just like you did the first time around in cycle 1. The words that they use, you need to be repeating and you need to know them well. And those are in the glossary still for cycle 2, just like they were in cycle 1. So words we need to be familiar with, you're using the words assets again. And their funds of knowledge. What do students know, and what positive assets do they bring to the table of knowledge? Okay, not the negatives. What do they bring, and what do they need growth in? So be very careful how you word it. Then adaptations and accommodations. Do you understand what those are, and do you use them in your lesson and your narratives? Funds of knowledge, technology, and rubric. One thing I will say about technology, if you are still teaching online during this COVID-19 quarantine time, they have said, CTC has said that meets the technology requirement. So you won't have to do anything else but just be using Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it is you might be using with your school district. Okay, so that meets the technology requirement. Rubrics are extremely important. If you do not turn in rubrics with these assignments, with these context of what they're asking you for, you won't pass. Okay, so that's really critical. We have to make sure that you understand what a rubric is and when you need to submit it. So let's take a look at what you need. As I said, you need part A, That is the contextual information about your class. You can use the same information from from cycle 1 if that will help, if those are the same students you have. However, if you're starting from who you had in the spring and now you're going to the fall, you will obviously have new students. So just be sure they're the students that you currently have. And then what you're going to do is you're going to plan your learning segment. In cycle 1, you were able to use a UDL template from Point Loma. In this situation, you are using Pearson's template. You are not using Point Loma's UDL template, so please do not submit that. You're using the actual learning segment template, which each of these templates, Part A and Part B, are available in Canvas for you to download, make your own, and title for yourself, and begin typing the information into use for submission. So as always, in a lesson plan, you need to include the standards, the Common Core state standards, ELD and ALD, which is preparing students for the vocabulary that they're going to be needing to use. What's the academic language that they will be using? The English language that they will be using? What are the words that are going to be the most difficult? Remembering that it's not only for ELs that you're doing this for. You're doing this for the entire class because all students are learning English. So keep that in mind. What are the adaptations and accommodations that you're putting into play to support your IEP 504, your GATE students? What are your activities? What strategies are you using? Grouping, how are you grouping students? What are the learning links you are creating in order to connect what they know from their background knowledge, to what they're going to learn now? And what are the links you're creating for that? And then the assessment, the evidence of assessments. So what you're doing once again is you're planning 3 to 5 lessons that make up a unit. These do not include the reteach and the extension. So this is just the 3 to 5 lessons you're going to be teaching to begin with. So at least 3. And then what are the assessments that you're going to be including in that? So let's take a look at those. You need to have an informal assessment. Please do not use thumbs up, thumbs down. That's not rigorous enough. An informal assessment needs to be just checking quickly whether students understand, but you can't get enough information from them of just using thumbs up and thumbs down. So that's the first, informal assessment. Second, self-assessment. That is a student self-assessment. It's not you as the teacher assessing a student. It's them assessing how they're learning and what they think they know, their perception. And then last, a formal assessment. So the order it could kind of go in is you do an informal assessment maybe in lesson 1. In lesson 2, towards the end, you have students self-assess how they think they're learning. And then in lesson 3, if you were to perhaps only do 3 lessons, you would wrap it up at the end of lesson 3 with a formal assessment to check for understanding of the whole entire unit that you have done, the 3 lessons you have done. And you're going to take that content and then you're going to be, or those results, and you're going to be deciding how to move forward after that. So what you need to show as evidence of these assessments is you're going to write an explanation or describe what you plan to use as assessments and explain how they are aligned to the content. Okay, so that's what you're going to be doing in the written narrative. That's part C. Part D, E, and F is you need to upload an example, a blank copy of an informal assessment, the self-assessment, and the formal assessment. Okay, blank copies. So whatever you design, you need to have blank copies of those to upload. But not only that, you need to have a rubric in which you can score each of those assessments. So you're going to design a rubric specifically for the informal assessment, a rubric specifically for the student self-assessment, and a rubric specifically for the formal assessment. And you're going to upload those, all 6 of those. So they're going to go in pairs: informal assessment with a rubric, self-assessment with a rubric, and formal assessment with a rubric. So that's what D, E, and F are here that they're referring to. We will have another video on rubrics because that is a critical portion alone. You need to know how to make a rubric and what they expect in order for it to pass the mustard, so to speak. If you do not upload rubrics, you will not pass. So rubrics are critical, and one of the #1 ways students don't pass the TPA in cycle 2 because they didn't realize that they were supposed to add rubrics in and they didn't pass because of it. So that's very critical. Down here on the left, What this talks about here is how you are being scored. So now this is a separate rubric, but this is the rubric in the assessment guide that they look at, including myself. I'm a scorer for cycle 2, for how they're going to score you on what you have done and turned in. Okay, so in this particular step 1, they are going to assess you on your lesson plan. They're going to have a rubric to assess you on your lesson plan, and a rubric to assess you on how well you did on your assessments, your building of them, and the rubrics that match them. Okay. So in order to pass, which is what we want, obviously, is you need to get a 21 out of 45. So you need to get 3s, 4s, and 5s. Now I'll say this about getting a 1. You can get 1 and have all the rest 5s and still pass. But if you get 2 1s, it doesn't matter what your score is. You could have a 35, a 40, you won't pass if you have 2 areas, components that are scored a 1. So please keep that in mind, okay? Also, what we want to take a look at here is these questions down at the bottom. They are going to be used in your peer review, peer editing groups. These are questions that I use in scoring students myself. These would be excellent to double check to be sure that you can answer these questions and answer them correctly. That will assure you a higher score. Okay, so be sure of that. Over here on the left, higher order thinking skills. These need to be used throughout. They don't want to see you just asking students to give rote memory responses. Okay, that's a lower order thinking skill. We do not want that. What they want you to do is what we want you to do in the classroom is use the higher order thinking skills. So that's asking students to transfer knowledge, to analyze knowledge, to interpret, to evaluate content, and to synthesize content and learning. Okay, so that's what you need to make sure you do. So keeping all of these things in mind, these hot skills here are actually going to be expressed throughout all of the steps. So just keep in mind that you are going to be using those throughout. And I look forward to helping you with step 2. So let's right now get on it and start reading the assessment guide and step 1. Get ready to go.